80 miles per hour. A curved metal roof with no handrails, no grip, no margin for error. 4 trained killers surrounding a single man with nothing between him and death except 25 years of preparation and the specific refusal to accept the outcome that had been designed for him. No cameras, no stunt coordinator standing by with a safety protocol, no director to call cut when the scene became too dangerous. Just wind that hit like a physical object and track that disappeared beneath steel wheels fast enough to make the landscape blur into abstraction. What happened on that Southern Pacific train on March 15, 1971, traveling through the rural corridor between San Francisco and Sacramento, was not supposed to become a story. It was supposed to become a body, a tragedy. A film star dead in a freak railway accident, the kind that generates newspaper coverage and an open and shut investigation, and a verdict of misadventure that closes the file and answers no real questions. That was the plan, executed by professionals who had never failed a contract. Here is why this one was different. The context that made the train necessary begins 2 months earlier, in February, in a Chinatown restaurant where an old man named Chen was being reminded of his obligations. Chen ran a modest establishment. He paid his taxes and his suppliers and his staff, and he declined, on principle, to pay the Hong Kong triad collectors who arrived periodically to supplement their income at the expense of people who couldn't afford lawyers or police attention. The enforcers who came to adjust his perspective on that decision encountered Bruce Lee, who was there having dinner, and who intervened with the specific efficiency of someone for whom the arithmetic of 5 against 1 creates no particular hesitation. 3 broken arms, 2 shattered knees. Chen went home that evening intact. The 5 enforcers did not. The triad's response to humiliation was not the response of organizations that accept defeat gracefully. They had sent gang members. Bruce had handled them. They had sent enforcers. Bruce had handled those too. Each failure compounded the reputational damage of the previous one, and organizations that operate through fear cannot absorb reputational damage without responding to it in terms that restore the original fear. The calculation they arrived at was straightforward. 4 professional assassins, $200,000 total, a train route, and a plan that used the moving environment as a weapon independent of anything the assassins themselves needed to supply. Bruce boarded the train without knowledge of any of this. He preferred trains to planes for exactly the reasons that made this one dangerous. The quiet, the time to think, the particular quality of solitude that 3 hours of moving landscape provides to someone with a mind that needed space to work. He had a script treatment from Warner Brothers in his hands, development notes for a project that was still more ambition than certainty, and a meeting behind him with studio executives who remained diplomatically skeptical about whether Chinese martial arts could carry a Hollywood production. He was traveling alone. He was focused. He was exactly as vulnerable as the people who planned this had calculated. They boarded at Oakland. 4 men, large, carrying themselves with the specific economy of movement that military training produces and never fully removes. They gave no indication of coordination as they moved through the cars, positioned themselves, waited for the train to clear city limits and push into the rural stretch where speed was unrestricted and intervention was structurally impossible. Then the compartment door opened. Bruce read the room in the seconds before anyone spoke. The way the 4 distributed themselves in the doorway was not the random arrangement of people who had arrived at the same destination independently. It was coverage, angular positions that accounted for the space between them, that left no angle unobserved, that had been designed by people who thought about fields of vision and escape routes the way most people think about where to stand in an elevator. He saw the knives at their belts. He read the jacket bulges that indicated concealed firearms. He assessed the 4 faces and found what he was looking for, or rather what he was not looking for and found anyway, the specific absence of ambivalence. These were not men in the process of deciding whether to do something. They were men who had already decided and were executing. The leader delivered the terms. Roof. Immediately, or the families in the adjacent car would discover that their peaceful afternoon journey had a different ending than they had planned. He gestured toward the window. A mother reading to a child. An elderly couple sharing something that made them both smile. Students with textbooks open. People who had done nothing except board the same train. Bruce looked at them, looked back at the 4 men, and stood. The calculation was not complicated. He followed them to the service ladder. The roof opened the wind the way opening a pressure valve opens sound. At 80 miles per hour, Sustained wind is not weather, it is environment, constant and total, hitting from one direction with the consistency of something that has forgotten how to stop. Bruce's first step onto the curved metal nearly resolved the entire situation in the triad's favor before anyone threw a punch. He caught himself with the micro-adjustment of a body that had been trained for so long that its responses to imbalance operated below the level of conscious instruction. He found his center. He lowered it. He spread his weight across both feet in the stance that the situation required rather than any stance his training had explicitly named. The four men arrayed themselves around him in the formation that their backgrounds had produced. Textbook encirclement, the kind designed to ensure that whatever direction a target moves, at least one person is already waiting. Their leader, who introduced himself as Dmitri with the comfortable ease of a man who assumed this conversation was its own conclusion, had a background in Soviet special forces and a combined body count that he summarized without apparent emotion. He offered Bruce a quick death and asked if he had final words. Bruce told him his stance was wrong, that his weight distribution was compensating incorrectly for the wind, that he would fall before he completed his first attack. He meant it as assessment, not provocation, though the distinction was lost on its recipient. Dmitri gave the order. The first man came from the left flank, knife extended, committed to a downward arc that would have been effective in 30 feet of stable ground. On a curved metal roof at 80 miles per hour, committed means something different. Committed means that when the target moves and you follow your momentum, the environment participates in the outcome. Bruce stepped into the attack's geometry, rather than away from it, the counterintuitive response that changes what the attacker's own energy does when the target it was aimed at is no longer in the expected location. He redirected rather than blocked, the distinction being that redirecting uses the attacker's force as a contribution rather than an obstacle. The man's trajectory continued beyond its intended destination, and at 80 miles per hour, the edge of a train roof is a boundary with no appeal process. The wind did the rest. First man, gone. The remaining three processed this in the fraction of a second that professionals use to recalibrate rather than freeze. The one called Victor, working the left flank, attempted the tactical sequence that military training considers reliable, the visible feint to draw defensive response, followed by the actual attack arriving from the opposite direction before the defense can redirect. It is reliable against fighters who read the initial movement and commit to answering it, against someone reading the deeper signal, the shoulder tension before the feint begins, the hip orientation that reveals where the real attack is already loaded. It is a declared intention wearing a thin disguise. Bruce read the declaration, ignored the disguise, and answered the real attack before it arrived. The sidekick connected with Victor's leading knee from the lateral angle that human knee joints are specifically not designed to handle. The sound carried over the wind noise. Victor followed the first man. Dmitri made the decision that desperation produces in trained men when the math stops working in their favor. He had a firearm and he used it. 7 shots at a target that should not have been able to move the way it moved. That should not have been able to vacate the space that a bullet was already occupying before the bullet arrived. 7 shots. 7 sparks on metal roof. 7 misses that accumulated into something the shooter's expression described as terror before it described anything else. The slide locked back on an empty chamber. Bruce crossed the distance. The spinning kick arrived at Dmitri's wrist with the precision of someone who had calculated the target rather than improvised toward it. The gun left. The follow-up reached the temple with exactly enough force to remove Dmitri from the equation without removing him from the world. Bruce pulled him back from the edge and laid him flat, alive. That decision was a choice, not an accident. The fourth man, the youngest, had watched his 3 colleagues fail in ascending order of desperation. He dropped his knife. He raised his hands. He said the words. Bruce told him to lie flat, grab the roof, and stay there. Then Bruce saw the tunnel. Ahead, perhaps a quarter mile, a dark opening in the mountain face that the track entered without slowing, without signaling, without consulting the people currently standing on the roof of the car that was going to pass through it. The clearance between a tunnel entrance and the surface of a train car is not the clearance between a tunnel entrance and a person standing on the surface of a train car. It is a measurement that makes the distinction irrelevant in the most final available terms. At 80 miles per hour, with perhaps 30 seconds before the train reached the opening, the arithmetic was simple and its answer was singular. He ran toward the rear of the train. Running into 80 miles per hour of sustained wind, is a different problem than running in still air. It is the difference between moving through space and pushing against something that pushes back with the consistency of a wall that keeps moving with you. His balance held because it had been built to hold in conditions that had never specifically included this one, but that shared enough underlying physics to transfer. Behind him, the fourth man panicked. Panicked men stand up when they should stay down. He stood. Bruce reached the rear edge of the last car, looked at the tunnel, now seconds away, looked at the grassy embankment running alongside the track, did the mathematics that the body does faster than the conscious mind. Velocity, angle, trajectory, the landing zone, the probability distribution of outcomes. He jumped sideways, away from the track and toward the embankment, with the lean of someone who understood that the goal was not to survive the jump, but to survive the landing, and that those two things required different calculations. The ground arrived. He hit, tucked, distributed the impact across the broadest available surface of himself, kept rolling until the momentum that 80 miles per hour generates had completed its negotiation with friction and gravity, and stopped. He lay still for several seconds, conducting inventory, fingers, toes, the verification that everything connected to everything it was supposed to connect to. Bruised, battered, in the way that a person is battered after hitting the ground at speed and surviving it. Unbroken, breathing. He sat up in time to watch the train disappear into the tunnel. He heard the sound from inside the mountain that confirmed what the fourth man's decision had cost him. Bruce walked 3 miles to the nearest town and called the police. The report he gave was accurate and complete. The train conductor confirmed that 2 unconscious men had been found on the roof when the train reached Sacramento. The bodies of the others were recovered in the days that followed. The investigation produced a file that documented a contract killing gone catastrophically wrong, 4 men sent to do a job that turned out to be substantially different from the one they had prepared for, and 1 target who walked 3 miles to make a phone call and then presumably went back to thinking about the Warner Brothers development notes he had left in his compartment. The studio heard about it. The way studios hear about everything that happens to people whose projects they are developing. A film star who had survived a professional assassination attempt on a moving train roof was a different conversation than a film star whom skeptical executives needed convincing was worth their investment. Enter the Dragon was greenlit, the film that would make Bruce Lee's name permanent, that would carry everything he had built and believed and trained toward into every country on Earth, moved from concept to production. History has a way of turning on the moments that were supposed to prevent it. March 15th, Northern California. A contract worth $200,000 and the certainty of 4 professionals who had never failed, against 1 man who had spent 25 years preparing for worst-case scenarios without ever being told what this specific one would look like. The wind at 80 miles per hour doesn't care what your credentials are. The curved metal roof doesn't make accommodations for your training history. Physics offers no exceptions and accepts no appeals. On that afternoon, on that route, 1 man found the available exceptions within a system that claimed to have none. He walked away from it. The plan that was designed to make him disappear made him instead impossible to ignore. That is the story. That is what the train roof settled, permanently, at 80 miles per hour in March of 1971, before anyone who needed to know had been told that it was possible.